It's raining down there on the outside, but I suspect it's sunny in your heart, Governor, because I understand you sort of like this decision. Is that correct?
Yes, I do. Yeah, it was one of the first actions I took when I became governor of Illinois in early 2015. One of my first actions was to sign an executive order ending the forced collection of union dues for state employees who didn't want to be in the union. And I also initiated the lawsuit. I sued AFSCME to end their forced dues collection. I firmly believed it was a violation of state employees' freedom of speech to force them to pay dues they didn't want to pay. And we prevailed today in the Supreme Court. It's a historic ruling.
So if you read the opinion, as I know you've done in the dissent, it comes down to the First Amendment right not to participate in something you don't want to participate in. On the other hand, the right of the state to really control employees. But how much of a business decision is this? I mean, you're a very experienced, successful business person. How much of this is going to affect your finances in Illinois?
Well, this is a historic win for taxpayers. Taxpayers for too long have suffered from the excessive, unfair costs of the unfair, conflicted relationship between government union leaders and the politicians who they helped elect, as well as negotiate with. This historic ruling will now restore more integrity in the government and to help state employees who don't support the behavior of government leaders. They don't support their activity. They are no longer forced to fund that activity.
And given this ruling, do you expect an exodus of state employees opting out of these unions?
Well, we'll see how this plays out over time. We will be notifying our state employees of their rights and of the ramifications of this ruling. We'll be creating a website. For those state employees who want to be in a union and support the union, they're free to do that. That's great. And we'll help them fund their union dues. But for those state employees who don't agree with the union or its activity, they will no longer be forced to pay dues, and we will no longer collect dues on their behalf. The important thing, I think, for your viewers to understand is this has no impact on trade unions, private sector unions. Their activity is in the private sector, doesn't impact taxpayers, doesn't impact government policy. But what the Supreme Court correctly ruled is that all activity, both political donations as well as negotiating and working on policy and advocacy, all activity in government unions is political by its very nature, and therefore to force someone to fund it is forced political speech and therefore unconstitutional.
Some fear that the ramification of this ruling will be this free rider problem that will threaten the very existence of these public sector unions. Are you concerned that weekend unions won't be able to represent state employees as well and properly as they should?
No, not at all. That is a false argument and a false fear. In the federal government, there is not a requirement for federal government employees to fund a union that they're not a member of, but there are still tens of thousands of federal government employees who are in a union because they choose to be. So this is already federal policy. And 28 states around America already have this policy where they do not force non-union members to pay dues. It already is existing in those states, and it's already helping those states have fairness for their taxpayers and good government and protecting their workers. This really only impacts 22 states that have unconstitutionally forced that funding. That's what this ruling changes.
And in those 28 states, as you know, the participation in the public employee unions is far lower than it is in states where that hasn't been the case. If it's going to be a matter of fairness for the taxpayers in Illinois, then doesn't that necessarily mean that Illinois is going to be paying less money to public employees? Otherwise, why does it matter?
Well, we'll see whether, in the end, what we pay more or less, or what the work rules are, how contracting is done. That will be determined in good faith through collective bargaining. That will continue to exist. We will continue to have government unions in Illinois and across the country. We'll just see how that plays out over time. But this ruling restores freedom of speech and freedom of political affiliation as the Constitution of the United States properly requires.
Okay, Governor, thank you so much. It would be an honor to have you on any day, but in that pouring rain with fire trucks and everything else around you, you really were a champ. We really appreciate you being with us, Governor.
Well, I'm very proud of this ruling. It was my lawsuit that's got all this started back 3.5 years ago. We're proud of the outcome. It's the right answer for the people of America and our hardworking government employees.